can't ignore it and give us great answers when you think it benefits you, and then use it as a shield when you don't want to tell us what goes on. The second thing is, you can't. It's just bizarre how you can say, well, that didn't happen, but if it did happen, I never told my dad about my business or anything like that. Some of these things were just so absolutely contradictory that they were almost within the same breath, where this happened, but then it didn't happen. And so I think when the transcript comes out, it's going to read well for them, because they did a great job prepping for a read. But that's but the reality is, yeah. But when you get down to it and you start parsing the words, you start realizing, oh yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Well, these were some words that were reported, along with what you said, that, you know, he blamed his drug addiction, and then he would say, I made that up. Is that an excuse? I mean, if your drug addiction is what it is, and then you make stuff up, is that a defense?
It's not really defense, and it's actually incredible, because things that he said he made up, actually we have other witnesses that said that X and Y and Z happened, and he's in there like, well, I made that up, or I was stoned, or whatever he may have said to that deal. But I mean, we have other witnesses that corroborate the truthfulness of it.
Yeah, so. And depending on where he said those things that he made up, if any of them were under oath, we call that lying under oath. But we'll have to see where he said things that he made up. Former President Trump has been kicked off another state's ballot. This time it's in Illinois. And the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed, meanwhile, to rule on whether Trump has immunity in Jack Smith's election interference case, an election year dispute that will have blockbuster legal and political implications for the entire nation. Shannon Bream is live for us in Washington, D.C. Shannon.
So, Harris, you know the Supreme Court does not enjoy being in the middle of election year political issues, but it's now juggling several cases that could have a big impact on this year's campaign. So I want to break down a couple for you. In addition to that Illinois judge who just booted the former president from the primary ballot, on Super Tuesday, you've got two other states that made the same decision, but it's all on hold pending a decision from these justices, the Supreme Court, about whether Colorado had the right to do what it did. The justices heard those arguments back on the 8th. That decision could come at any time. Both Colorado and Maine do have the former president's name on their primary ballots, and say whether those votes will actually get counted or not is all up to that decision we are awaiting from the justices. Could come at any time. Well, in many respects, the legal team for Trump could also argue that they got a win from the Supreme Court yesterday simply by virtue of the justices deciding to take up the case about whether he has some sort of immunity in the Jack Smith January 6th case against him. This is the exact question. You got a lot of lawyers there on the couch with you. This is what they've agreed to hear in April. Whether, and if so, to what extent, does a former president enjoy presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for conduct alleged to involve official acts during his tenure in office? Yesterday's order from the court does not tell us how each of the justices voted, but they made clear the court is not, quote, expressing a view on the merits yet. Decision due by late June. Only then would the trial court lift the pause on proceedings, which could then take weeks or months to actually get this thing to trial, meaning it could end up in summer, early fall, even later, Harris.
Wow. All right. So you've given me some homework assignments with our legal eagles here on the couch. Appreciate it always, Shannon. Good to see you. All right. So let's just unpack that a little bit. First of all, what happens in those states like Illinois and others? And we can pop up a map. There are others who would love to join the party, but either they've been dismissed in those states, and those will be in blue, or they were dismissed on appeal. The rest of states might be interested in trying to take him off the ballot, like Maine and Colorado. So what happens?
The Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in here. And in hearing arguments on the states so far, what we saw is that this isn't just a 6-3 divide in the Supreme Court. This could be a 7-2 decision, an 8-1, or maybe even a 9-0 decision. There seems to be bigger support than just that 6-3 breakdown to prevent this. I don't want to hear anything from the left about attacks on democracy when you see an attack like this. There is no greater threat against democracy than Joe Biden and Democrats saying that Americans don't have a right to choose their own president in November. This is the greatest threat to democracy that is imaginable.
Well, it's also like a really big deal about election interference. Why doesn't anybody ever call it that? I call it that.
That's right. It's perfect segue. You must have been reading my mind. I spoke to someone the other day, a loyal Fox watcher, and someone who said, look, my biggest concern is the fact that no one seems to ever assuage our concerns about election integrity and about election interference. Why is it that these questions we have don't even seem not only to not be answered, but even to be addressed in the public sector? And that map, to me, perfectly illustrates one of the legal arguments, which is the patchwork effect. How can you take away from the people the power to have a candidate for a national election on every single one of the ballots when it so clearly is only here in a consideration in some of the states? It's a fascinating question, but I think that the largest continued slap in the face by the left is the knee-jerk quote behind Donald Trump's name, which is the threat to democracy, when the greatest threat is if this occurs.
And can I just add, this is clearly election interference. It's proven to be election interference when you see all the tears on the other side come down over the course of the last 24, 48 hours.
Yes.
All right, let's pop up that map one more time. I want you to notice the gold. Those are the states that are pending with this. I mean, you talk about a patchwork. We're going to go into an election season, depending on how this shakes out, because some of these places, like Maine and Colorado, will have taken his name off the ballot before the U.S. Supreme Court will weigh in. And if they weigh against Trump and those votes don't count, that means their neighbors in the state next door, their votes didn't matter because it was wiped away before they could vote.
And this breaking news, while we were showing you that, we now have an update on former President Trump's appeal against his New York civil fraud verdict. A New York appellate judge has rejected the former president's request to put a pause on the $454 million civil fraud penalty. But the former president did win his request to temporarily delay rulings that banned him from running a business in New York State and taking out loans from New York banks. With that, we bring in Jonathan Turley, constitutional law attorney and Fox News contributor. Jonathan, a bit of a split decision there for the former president. His attorneys pushed this delay on the grounds that this amount is so enormous that it is exorbitant and punitive, were their words. What do you think about this decision?
Well, it does give him a little breathing room. It still leaves him with a rather onerous burden. But the decision of the lower court, in my view, was unfair. You know, the judge imposed an unprecedented penalty under this law for this type of conduct. In fact, none of us have seen this law applied in this way. And by doing so, he not only hit Trump with this massive award, but required Trump to put the money up front under a separate rule, which requires you to deposit money or to get a bond. And then Trump was hit with a 30-day deadline to do so. And then on top of that, he was unable to do business with some of the New York banks. Most of us felt that that was really beyond the pale. I mean, at some point, it becomes confiscatory just in order to bring an appeal. And, you know, the example is that if you're contesting an order taking your home, you shouldn't have to sell your home to appeal that order. But people like Attorney General James were talking about precisely that. She was actually naming properties that she might seize or he might sell just to get the Court of Appeals to look at this opinion. So it is a mixed victory for Trump, but it does give him some more options he didn't have before.
Yeah, she is very gleeful about the situation that he's in right now. She said, you know, I look up at 60 Wall Street every single day. Basically, if he just sells that, he could solve this problem. She's also putting on her X account every day the newly accrued amount, including the new interest that happens daily on this amount. Does he have any further recourse on this amount, in your opinion, which I think is due in a couple of weeks now?
Yeah, it's very hard. In order to get a further review, he can ask for it. I do think that he has very good grounds here to say that this was an excessive award, but also the conditions for appeal are beginning to shock the conscience, or at least they should. So I think he can push further, but he's unlikely to succeed with the Court of Appeals.
It's extraordinary. The largest single judgment against any individual, I believe, in American history in this decision here against the former president. And it's a victimless crime, as they have admitted in this court. But they came up with an exorbitant judgment, in his opinion. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
He will be able to get that appeal. That's the key. He just has to come up with money. Right.
All right. Jonathan, thanks for hopping on with the breaking news. That's the story for today.